Hey, welcome everybody. This is author MS Woodley, aka Mahisha, and I wanted to talk about my book ADHD-ish, which is Disruptive Holistic Leadership for Parents. And if you're parents, you know this is going to affect entrepreneurs, businesses, corporate America, policy, finance, economics, so it's all connected and relative. Listen, I was working on this book for the past 8 years, and I just, like many books, being neurodivergent, can't really get it together because you're pulled in, 40 million different directions. But this discussion is going to be a little unique, a little different than the average discussion on being ADHD-ish. And I say ADHD-ish because my definition of ADHD-ish is it's a term used to describe the qualities or traits of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADD, ADHD, but without the formal, without the formal diagnosis. And so that's really important because I've been teaching for a lot of years, working with young kids and communities for a lot of years. So I got a chance to get a lot of, in addition to my own personal experience with being, let's call it neurodivergent, because it may turn into something else, or depending on what the view is, an expectation of thinking and behavior. That word to me fluctuates a little bit. Even ADHD-ish, the terms have expanded. Or ADHD, ADHD, yes, correct. It has expanded, it has changed, so I'm not really stuck on the words. And that's also, a product of being neurodivergent because being neurodivergent, we often look at things and how they function, and how they function. We often look at things and how they function and not just what they appear as. Right. So the word is a vibrating word, meaning that it can change at, any given time with, within the laws or within policy and so on and so forth. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how ADHD-ish came about. Again, I came up with the concept with a few other books because my lived experience and how I learned informed a lot on how I taught. And so I created some amazing things throughout the past 30 years, I would say, just now taking this unique view of things and working with kids and community and changing things up. Even when people say, oh, you can't change certain things. You can't, it is what it is. Not in the mind of a neurodivergent. So, yeah, it's been a very interesting road. And I'll tell you, I say this book was 8 years in the making, and it was completed I'll say about maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So I worked with my buddy Miguel, paid him to be my accountability coach, and I'll wind up completing the book in 8 weeks. And this was important because you have to have urgency attached to whatever you do. That's not unique to being neurodivergent, nor is that unique to being, whatever. That's just what it is with anything you particularly do. You get the things done that have urgency attached to it. Just real quickly, I wanted to just shout out a few people that have been on my heart, and I spoke to some recently. I want to shout out my friend Sarah. I want to shout out my friend Chris Gallagher. I'm gonna give you a call, Chris, a little later. I just want to say that. I want to shout out my friend Lawan, Dr. Rick. I want to shout out my sister Isis. I want to shout out my sister Kim, my sister Star. I want to shout out family because I think is really important. I want to shout out my cousin Alethea. I just want to do that because there is just the people that I resonate with every day that impact how I move, and I feel comfort in who they are and who I am to them. So you'll find out as you get a chance to know me how important, you'll find out how important to me, my back office is family energy, the energy that I keep around me, because I come from a family of neurodivergence. I had the privilege of being born in a family. My mother's a neurodivergent, my dad's a neurodivergent, and they were artists. And it's just now recently that, over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, that we brought ADHD-ish to the attention of the world in a way that allows it to be examined, allows the definition to be examined. And I like that, because before, again, I knew the word and all this other type of stuff. I just had to be. I was just myself. My mother was who she was, my dad who he was. And we just existed in this very creative household. I grew up in East Flatbush, grew up throughout the crack epidemic, and even before. But just to be able to see how neurodivergence and creative people transcend these very hard times that take a lot of people out. And I appreciate that. I like the word resilient, because that tends to stick with, the plight of the African American, and being resilient. But there's resilience, and then there's layers to resilience. Back to the book. I'm very grateful that I had my accountability coach, and then we get a chance to talk about this very powerful conversation around ADHD-ish and, being neurodivergent, even autism, and it's all relevant. And there's a spectrum of different things. And I'm going to try to focus on what it is that this book is actually about, because then I can tell you what it's actually not about. So let's start with the criticism of ADHD-ish, my book. First and foremost, I wrote it as a neurodivergent. And that's very important. I wanted to see how I wrote under pressure, and having an accountability coach, writing this book, and having to finish, and finishing it for me was like cutting off 1,000 different options. So this book is literally about, I would say, infinite amount of topics that aren't necessarily topics that we talk about. The status quo, like there are other elements that informed my lived experience. And lived experience is so goddamn important, because that is what makes you an expert in your experience. And if you share that experience, it's just going to take it to the next level. If you share the experience with others, it's going to help them take their lives to the next level. But what it is not is what people have historically told you it was, because that doesn't ring true to a lot of people. In the ADHD-ish paradigm, we've gotten, well, I'll save that for another conversation when we have doctors and therapists on on a podcast where we can really, really unpack some of these things. But as of now, I'm going to talk about what I said I initially wanted to talk about, but I got distracted again. You seen that? So some of the criticism that I've gotten from this book is it's not easy to follow. Some other criticism I got is, well, it's not about autism. And some other criticism I got, what else is, okay, so there's like a ton of grammar, spelling, outdated words, and politically incorrect terms. Like, I use the word retarded, but if you look at some of the some videos that have gone viral on Instagram, you'll see that in the context of the 70s and the 80s, that's a word that was used. That was the highest language that was in policy, socially acceptable. And I think that it's really, really important that people do take context into consideration so much more than what we allow to happen in conversation today. Like, for me, context is extremely important because it frames everything. I can't talk about trauma or my past experiences with something, if you're not holding space for me when I'm saying this is what happened to me, or this is what my experiences were in the mid 80s or the 90s, or even as a child, and I'm using, words that they used at the time. Don't punish me for the words that they used at the time. That has to deal with policy. That has to deal with social norms. And I'm telling you my story. So hold space for me. Yeah, it's going to be what is considered politically incorrect. And I may be canceled, but I'm willing to take the risk on just unpacking that conversation, because that was very real and true to me. So another thing about being neurodivergent is context, because there's this wonky thing with time, and it's very important. Like you'll see if you ever have a conversation with me or we converse, I get so engaged in what someone is saying. I mean, I just want to take out popcorn. I think this is definitely one of my superpowers. When we converse and I lock you in, I want to take out my popcorn. I often tell people, hold on, pause, rewind, and say that again, right? So context and holding people and allowing them to express is very, very important. It's a superpower of mine, and that's why I'm considered a good friend, a good listener. And so I'm just saying, I'm not asking for permission, but I'm extending that courtesy, because this is my damn podcast. And I'm saying, this is what my experiences are. I'm coming from my perspective. So anywho, so those are the few things. It's not easy to follow because it's not a linear book. It's definitely not a linear book. I'm a neurodivergent who wrote neurodivergently, quote unquote ADHD-ish, because, I've never was diagnosed, but I know, just what it looks like. Maybe I'll get, I'll tickle my fancy and go in and get, the assessment or what have you. But I really don't need the assessment, because I've lived with my brain all my life. And so